Welcome to the New Mexico News Podcast, headlines and stories from the land of enchantment. Brought to you by KRQE. Here's Chris McKee and Gabrielle Burkhart.
All right, so the elephant in the room really quick. Jessica is filling in for Chris McKee. This is not Chris McKee today with me on the podcast. Chris just started his paternity leave. He has a new baby boy, so we're super excited for him. And I thought this would be a good topic to bring you in, Jess, since you've done a lot of education reporting and also you're a parent just like me. So, Jess, thanks for joining me.
Gabby, thank you. It's always a pleasure, and I always just look forward to being on your podcast.
Cool.
And congratulations to Chris.
Yes, congratulations, Chris, if you're listening, but you should not be focusing on work right now. So down to business this week, we're talking about something that impacts thousands of families. And even if you don't have kids in the public school system, it's something your tax dollars feed into. And the education of our children is certainly something we should all be concerned about. So let's introduce our guest. Here with us in the new digital studio is APS's newest superintendent, Dr. Gabriella Blakey. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So before we get into specifics, first, Dr. Blakey, just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background. What's led you to this moment of becoming superintendent for New Mexico's biggest school district?
Thank you. Thanks for having me and everyone who's listening. I think one of the things that's really kind of guided me in my career from even figuring out what I wanted to do in life when I was in college was I wanted a career that I could really impact society and make change. And so I didn't go into education as like the kid that played with their stuffed animals, like played school and wanted to be a teacher. My track was a little bit different in that I was looking for a career where I could really impact society on a larger scale and where we could really create change. And so I kind of fell into education in that sense. I was a teacher, and in the classroom, I was, frustrated with some of the policies that I saw were impacting my students negatively. So I went into school administration, and then that's just kind of led me into this career kind of focused on how we can better systems and structures for our students to better the outcomes. I grew up in Albuquerque. I'm a graduate of Highland High School, and I'm a really proud graduate that I feel is really set up for a successful future. But not all of my friends had the same outcomes. And so I'm really interested in how we can change outcomes for students so that they can have the success that I have had and some of my other friends have had, but make it more intentional instead of it just like finding success spotlights, but really making that the norm for our students.
What grade did you teach? Just curious.
I taught high school, actually, Yeah. I taught high school. I taught social studies and English as a second language.
Cool.
Dr. Blakey, my mom was a public school teacher, also taught ESL for more than 40 years. So I deeply appreciate all the New Mexicans who dedicate their lives teaching our students. And congratulations on your new position.
Thank you.
And we look forward to working with you in the coming years. Now, Scott Elder, your predecessor, retired last month after he led the district through the global pandemic. He took over as interim superintendent in 2020, and before him, we've had Raquel Reedy, briefly Luis Valentino, Brad Winter. Dr. Blakey, you were chosen over out-of-state finalist for this job, and you come into this role, as you just mentioned, within APS, and you have an extensive background in APS. It's been a while since APS has chosen an outsider, someone from out of state, for this position. What perspective do you believe your previous role within APS gives you in this new position?
Yeah, so I think that, what I've really noticed even in the past couple of months is that my perspective on the inside has really allowed me to know where we need to move. So in districts, when you come from outside, you have a little bit more of a learning curve. So change does take a little bit longer because you have to understand like the players, the landscape. And I feel like in the past couple of months, even in working with Mr. Elder's transition, I've been able to hit the ground running in a lot faster pace because I tell people I feel like I've always had like a little notebook of things that I would change if I were in charge. And so I have the opportunity to open up that notebook of system-wide things that I think have been a barricade to us being able to really move on outcomes. And I can move a lot faster. So that's kind of my perspective on being from the inside. Really allows you time to move faster. I know a lot of the community partners already. I know a lot of our concerns that we have. I know who is like cheerleading us and pushing us forward to do better. And more importantly, the past couple of years, the school board worked really hard to establish goals and guardrails and create a strategic plan. And I think because I was deeply involved in that work, I can really hit the ground at a faster pace, knowing clearly what the mission is, what the goals are. And I was part of listening to the community when they said, these are the things that are important to us. And when the school board came up with the goals, I was right there. So I feel like I have a really good sense of where we're going in this really important time in education.
And as, a leader of the biggest school district in New Mexico, I know that it comes with its own set of challenges, right? Whether it be budget, bus, bell schedules, teacher shortages, how well students are learning in the classroom, graduation rates, we could go on and on. But just overall, school safety also is at the forefront of families' minds when they send their kids off to school. I know we've done a lot of stories about that. I wanted to first address school safety because I think a lot of families, that's, the first thing they think about when they send their kids off to school. There's been some alarming reports of kids bringing guns onto school campuses. What is your message to families who may feel nervous about that going into this school year, and how safe can you say APS schools are under your watch?
I think that the internal structures of the school are very safe. We've invested a lot of money into safety and security, like hard security of schools, cameras, and all of those things. However, safety still has the human element involved that you can only make things so safe, but we need to make sure that our students are making safe choices. So, my real push to parents is to really be involved in your students' lives. Make sure you know what's in their backpack, what are they bringing to school, who are they hanging out with. The more we work with our students from that family perspective, I think that we create safety for not just the child who is making a poor decision, but the children who could be victims of that decision. And so I think it's really important that parents play a big part in talking to their children. And even if it means making sure that if, kids go home and they say, yeah, there was this kid, he was saying something that was concerning, or I saw something in his backpack, that parents say you need to say something, because, our see something, say something protocol works really well. And most of the things that we find are because students feel comfortable telling an adult what they see that they know isn't supposed to be at school. So we need to make sure that parents are working with their children too on if they see something, that they say something to an adult at school, and that we also create a sense of belonging at school so that all students really feel committed to taking care of their environment. And we're really working with the principals on making sure that all students feel belong at school, and that we create that sense of belonging so that students feel that school is a safe place. And if they're struggling, that they know that they can go to somebody for help.
I think as we've been reporting on these alarming cases, and we're just seeing more and more kids being able to get their hands on guns. And what do you tell parents who are worried about sending their kids to school because we're seeing that trend?
Yeah, I think, and it's something that, of course, is concerning to all of us, and knowing how we can work together as a community to make sure that, one, people understand the importance of locking up guns, and that we start to find out where students are getting guns. And so I know that within our partners at the DA's office and law enforcement, that they're trying to really assist in the community to make sure that guns aren't getting into the wrong hands, and that we're well aware of where students are getting them. So, I really applaud the work that the law enforcement side is doing to help us make our schools safer, by making sure that on the streets that the guns aren't getting into the wrong hands, and also making sure that people are aware of the importance of locking up their guns as well.
Last question on that topic, though. Do you feel like you're well equipped with enough security staff, school resource officers at this point?
I would say we can always use more of all personnel. So we do have a really strong team, and we have a really strong police department in Albuquerque Public Schools that works very closely with APD and the Sheriff's Office. But we could always use more of all human capital in all ways. So I wouldn't say that we are fully, equipped completely because we can always have more, but the staff that we have now, I feel our students are in very good hands.
Dr. Blakey, according to data from the Public Education Department, APS graduation rates dropped roughly 10 percentage points from 80 to 70% in 2022. Those are the most recent numbers published on the PED's website. And when you include charter schools, the rate dropped by about 7%. Still not great. We know the pandemic played a role in that generation, but overall, what do those numbers tell you, and what's your strategy to improve the graduation rate?
That's a great question because graduation is, of course, one of our top indicators of success after high school. Are students equipped to go into, the workforce, into college, and they're, ready to go to that next step? So graduation rates that are low are always very concerning. The drop is very expected because during the pandemic, students just were passed in class during the height of the pandemic. So we knew that when that happened and the way that school year ended, that our graduation rates would reflect this type of decline because of the inflation that we had that year when the school year was cut short. So that is kind of in our back head as an indicator. However, when you really look into the data, I don't want to see, certainly as a superintendent, that we have schools where, the chances of graduating are equal to the chances of not graduating. So if they're around the 50% graduation rate, that's a kick in your stomach.
Like a flip of the coin, yeah.
Yeah, so those are really concerning data to me that I want to make sure that we get in to address. I've tried to look at so where are the bright spots of schools that we see are having these increases? And we do see schools that have increases of up to 10% in their graduation rate. And we see schools that have a higher graduation rate than we thought that they were going to have. So how can we pull out those promising practices and make them systemic through the district instead of kind of spotty in that if you happen to go to that school, that's what's happening. So we're really working on identifying the promising practices that principals are really finding with their staff are impacting students in a positive way and making sure that the other high schools are equipped to do that. We also are making sure that our schools elementary to high school are very aware of the graduation rate of the feeder school for that high school because it doesn't just happen overnight. And it's something that how can the feeder school from elementary to high school wrap around services for students so that they're prepared for graduation. And it's a community effort as far as our schools working together.
What are those schools doing that they're seeing improvements in graduation rates?
One of the main things that they do is what we call early warning systems. And so they really look at the grades and attendance and behavior of students and they track it. So when they see indicators that are kind of red flag or when they get to yellow even, that they're able to intervene right away and get the students back on track. And so it's really the personal touch of identifying who the students are that we start to see in these indicators are falling behind and providing services to them, whether it be credit recovery, attendance support, what is really the deep-rooted issue. We also see a lot of support in some of our schools that are having the increase in their work with as a community school. So really being able to utilize resources that help students with what's kind of pulling them back in school to get them to rise. And so we've seen a lot of promising practices in the work in community schools as well that's really having a strong indicator of rising graduation. This recent data we have that isn't graduation, but it's looking at student proficiency, we've seen an increase in kindergarten readiness. We attribute that it could be partly connected to the increase of early childhood. And so, we can look at the end point as far as graduation of a 12th grader, but really it starts much earlier. So we do hope that as we start kind of seeing this investment in early childhood, that students, as they go through the school system and they graduate, we see that indicator really impacting them throughout their schooling.
I want to ask you too about bell schedules, because we know this has been a big point of contention among families and teachers just in the last couple of years. I had a kindergartner who entered APS last year, and she went from a school that was on, a 9 to 3 schedule. Sounds pretty normal. I was ready for that. And then we heard, okay, it'll be 7:30 start time, 2:30 dismissal. So a lot of time was spent in aftercare. I know that tardies increased exponentially at this particular school. The intended consequence, we understand, was to give those older kids more sleep, which is important. We know that balancing bus schedules was changing once again. That was hard with a shortage of drivers. This year, we got another notification that the Bell schedule was changing once again. Her elementary will be on a 9:15 start time with a 4 p.m. dismissal. So another pretty drastic change. We know our newsroom started getting messages from parents concerned about, not having time in the evening for extracurriculars, not getting to work on time, not having their voices heard was a big thing. So all this is to say, while we've got you here, why does the Bell schedule seem to be significantly changing year after year? And what do you say to families who feel like, these decisions are made completely out of their control?
So some of the Bell schedule, and I'm familiar with parts of it, but I officially started on Monday, so I can tell you what I know about the Bell schedule and some of those decisions that have been made. But partly it's not done in isolation of the changing legislation that has increased the amount of time students are in class. So on a traditional, it sounds like school starts and ends at this time, and now it's shifted. It hasn't just shifted because of the start and end time. It's shifted because the actual instructional time of the day has increased significantly for elementary school. So in high school, the students went to school for a longer day anyway. Elementary always was shorter. So with the change of legislation to increase instructional time in school, the elementary day had to get longer. And so that's why you'll see, if a school used to be at 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock and now they're 9:15 to 4 o'clock, why is it 15 minutes? It should just be 15 minutes different. But it's greater because the instructional day for students has increased. That also compounded the issue that teachers felt really constrained for time because the teacher day of elementary school increased to the same amount of instruction time for students. And they used to have more planning time while students weren't on campus. So then last year, they had to adjust the schedule 15 minutes to allow for teachers to have time without students. So that's why there's this kind of snowball effect from the first year when it was changed because of the instructional time and shifting high school. And then the next year it was changed, which would be this year, because of the 15 minutes. And then some schools used to be the 9:15 time. They moved to 7:30. They wanted to go back to 9 o'clock, but that bus tier is 9:15. So the closest they could get to their previous time was the 9 o'clock. So it's just this it's hard because it's not just one way to say it's because of this or this. It's just this ongoing change compiled with we have to figure out how to transport students on buses. So there's only so much you can do. If you were to do, a survey saying what time do people want to start and end school, most people are going to say 8 to 3. And so, but you can't transport 140
compromise
schools.
with me.
Yeah. So at the same time. So really, I know that the district is doing a lot of work in trying to expand before and after school care for students so that they can make sure that they're, and it's hard because everybody has different work schedules, So I realize that the parents, some parents work split shifts. Some parents work graveyard. Some parents work 8 to 5. Some parents work from home. There's just all of this scheduling stuff, So we really have to work with community partners on how we can provide families support before and after the bell so that it doesn't just rely on what time a physical bell rings at the school, but to be able to adjust more. To get school out earlier, past I think 4:30 is the latest school goes.
Yeah, I saw that.
We'd have to move school to start at 6:30. So there's just not enough time in the day. And the increase of instructional hours is really what's like preventing us to be able to kind of narrow it down before. With transportation, it was a little more flexible because elementary, again, was a shorter day than high school. So you have a little more flexibility in buses. And now it's all, 400 buses everybody trying to get on the road at the same time. Yeah.
And speaking of the schedules, as you mentioned, this all came about after lawmakers and the governor approved mandating more classroom hours and recently extended the school year to 180 days. Do you see this more classroom time as one of the keys to improving kids' learning and overall education?
I mean, I think definitely the more kids are in class, the more likely we're going to have an impact on student outcomes. So I definitely do agree that class time and seat time is an indicator of success outside. But I also know that the teacher is going to have the biggest impact on students. So I look at it kind of, if you don't have a qualified teacher in the classroom, then you can have students in for as many days or hours, but it's not going to make a difference compared to if you have a really qualified teacher in front of the students. So to me, like, it is a priority, but the higher priority is making sure that we have teachers in the classroom and making sure that teachers have time to do their planning and to adjust their lessons, and then making sure that kids are in school. So it is all kind of, it's not like one is the answer, but I think that the number of hours a student is in school is also dependent on the quality of the teacher. And it's also making sure that students are in school, because we have a really high chronic absenteeism rate. And so if we add more days and it increases the amount of time students are absent, then we're really not seeing the change that we're hoping to see by having students in class more.
I've seen 3 past administrations attempt everything you can imagine to improve education in New Mexico. Here's just a few of the initiatives. Governor Lujan Grisham, as we've mentioned, is counting on things like more class time, expanding pre-K, and putting millions into literacy programs. Former Governor Susana Martinez wanted to hold back students if they couldn't read in 3rd grade and reward teachers for higher testing proficiency. And her predecessor, Governor Bill Richardson, proclaimed in 2006 it was the year of the child and called on lawmakers to improve preschool and prepare high school students for college. We've raised teachers' pay over and over, and according to several reports, including the U.S. News and World Report, New Mexico spends and invests more money per student than our surrounding states, including Texas, Arizona, and Utah. Yeah, we're still last in the nation in education. What do you think it's going to take just to move the needle to get us out of that 50th spot?
I think one thing is to keep doing initiatives and not getting pulled off by the next shiny object that comes. So a lot of times things change so fast that just when we think we're getting like some ground, a new initiative comes and that replaces it. And when you really think about, children are in school for 13 years. And so to be able to see an initiative through, we can't keep changing, the way that we're teaching a certain skill or like shifting, because it impacts students along that 13-year trajectory. So, my commitment is to making sure that our teachers are well prepared, well supported, and well qualified in the classroom, because again, all research will say that the teacher is going to have the biggest impact on the student. We do see a lot of promising practices in early childhood that we think this is why we're starting to see a move on it. But again, it's a 13-year process. So if we see kindergarten now starting to see a little bit of shift because of the initiatives in early childhood, then it's going to take 4 years before we start seeing that in the 3rd grade reading. And by then, somebody could come along and take us a different way. So then you just never get to see see it forward. And so, I think that the more that we're committed to knowing, here are some things that we really are committed to. And as a state or as a city, as the public education department, we say we're committed to investing in this for 5 to 6 years and not getting off track, because that's how long it's going to take to even start to see a change in some of the data that they're using as indicators of success.
And as you're mentioning, some of those proposed initiatives have been met with resistance from the teachers union. We have a very strong teachers union in New Mexico. Is this a hindrance or help when trying to create these policies for children?
I don't know if it is a hindrance or a help. I think that, anytime you have pushback on anything, I think it brings progress, right? So like, I'm not one to say if somebody pushes back on something, like just retreat, but that's usually like with some push comes progress in a variety of issues that we face. So I really am like just somebody who listens to people's voices, because everybody's perspective matters in what we want to do to move forward. So I take, the input we get as perspective. I even tell the principals, like, you'll have parents coming to you and teachers coming to you and community members coming to you. And they might not all agree, but what's important as a decision maker is that you pay attention to the perspective and you keep the child in mind. So any of the ideas that come through, really you're looking at, how is this going to impact the child and make their success greater in school, and not think about who the message is coming from, but really think about that child. I really push on my team in all the areas that I've worked in to have, a picture of a child that's important to them when they make decisions, and know that, is the decision you're making going to make a difference for this child? And if so, then you feel confident you can move forward. And listen to the voices as perspective and as input, but it doesn't mean that you are going to make a decision based on one constituency or another. It's really on what's going to be the best for that child.
And now that you're in this role, it's a big position, big shoes. How are you going to measure success going forward?
Well, one of the biggest measures of success is, because we've committed to our goals as the school board and as a district, it's in we have monthly progress monitoring reports that is very public. It's in our school board meetings. And that's where people will start to see an indicator of if we're seeing a change to student outcomes. So overall, like, my progress in a very strategic, tactical way is to keep an eye on the data to see if we need to make adjustments along the way. And it doesn't mean that our initiatives are just like magic and they're going to work. But I think the magic sauce to it is that the school board is really committed to the goals, and that we're monitoring them throughout the year. Because if you look at, graduation rate, for example, and you only look at it at the end of the school year, and you don't have any indicators along the way, nobody should be surprised by the graduation rate at the end if you were keeping track of it along the way and making adjustments. So that I could say to you next year, yes, our graduation rate went up 5%, but in December when we were looking at it, we saw that it was going to move down, and we made these adjustments along the way. So that's how I look at, data, and how I measure success is, what were we looking at as the end result, and what along the way were we doing to adjust and make different practices. And I think that's a big shift in the work of the district. In my experience in working in the district, is how do we make shifts along the way? And I think the work of our progress monitoring and having really clear goals is really going to help in that.
Mm-hmm. Another thing we've seen post-pandemic is the shift from public schools to just parents choosing maybe to homeschool their children or send them to a charter or private school. How is APS dealing with enrollment shifts, and how is that impacting the district?
I think it's kind of two questions, because enrollment shifts in the city and in the state and actually in the nation are just down. We have lower birth rates. We kind of saw this coming because of the birth rates 5 years ago. And so, we've seen private schools close. We saw a couple of charter schools close this year. We've closed a couple of schools and consolidated them. So we've seen that kind of shift in general, just because of the number of children we have. But secondly to that, I did start a charter school in my career, and I think that the importance is that students find a place of belonging. It kind of goes back to the first question you asked me about school safety. And to me, it's more important that students and families find a place that that child is going to feel a sense of belonging and feel safe. And of course, I would welcome them into Albuquerque Public Schools. But if they find a place that they're going to be successful somewhere else, I want kids to be in a place where they feel a sense of belonging and safety, and that they're going to do well. Because as a community, we have to wrap our arms around our children. And it doesn't mean that I'm only wrapping my arms around the children that are in these 140 schools. It's our community. And so, my viewpoint on it is that all students and all families find a place where their child feels a sense of belonging. And I feel as Albuquerque Public Schools, it's our job to make sure we provide that space. But it's also our job to make sure that families have the decision of where they feel that their child's going to feel a sense of belonging.
What kind of challenges are you hearing from teachers about what they're facing in the classroom?
There's a couple of things. I started a listening tour towards the end of the school year to kind of really hear from the teachers as far as how I can support them, because the notebook I kept as a teacher is a little outdated, right? So I don't know if those are still the same problems that I faced as, when I was frustrated in the classroom. And a lot of it is time too. So teachers are really strapped for time. And I kind of tell people, it's like if you are in a business where you have like meeting all day, and then 5 o'clock hits and you're like, I've been in meetings all day. I'm just really tired and I don't have time to do any of the things that happened in those meetings. And that's how teachers feel every day, because they teach class, and they see kids struggling and they see that they need to adjust their lessons. And then they get these data that show where kids are progressing. And, here's Gabriella's struggling over here, but they don't have time to adjust because they have to go back the next day. So one of the big things I hear is we have to provide our teachers more time during the workday to adjust their lessons, review data, and be able to really focus on the instruction that they're doing in the classroom, and not expecting them to wait till the next year to do that, because we know that that's too late. The second thing is they're very concerned about student behavior. Cell phones being used a lot as a distraction, social media, just kids being distracted all the time. And so those are kind of the big things that I hear from teachers. Of course, there's other, working conditions in general really usually revolves around time to do work outside of direct instruction, and students being very distracted on their cell phones.
What do you think is going to be your biggest challenge this first year?
I think my biggest challenge personally is just making sure that we stay consistent and that we keep our eyes on what we said we were going to do. Kind of what you were talking about earlier, right, is how we, a new administration comes along, they take us this way, and then somebody else comes and takes us this way. And how can I be part of keeping us focused and not getting distracted by I read this article about this state and they did this, and so now I want to try doing this. I really want to focus on the promising practices we see now, and making sure that we give the staff the support needed and really cheerlead our kids. They need us. I feel a deep commitment to deliver on what we've promised to our youth. And so my challenge is that we stay the course, and that when we see data drop, that we make adjustments to the practice and not to the data. And so I think that that's going to really help us in the end.
Cell phones, social media, they're a huge, topic right now with our youth. And I think they've just changed the way kids are growing up these days. Would you ever be supportive of a cell phone free classroom, cell phone free zones?
We do have, so we have a procedural directive now that doesn't allow cell phones in schools during instructional time, unless students are using it for instruction. I think the big push on it is the enforcement. So I have seen, some schools have great success. I saw a school that I was visiting where when they walk into the classroom, every student has to put it in a bag and they keep it there until the class is over. I saw another school where they actually have these boxes, and when kids come in for the morning, they turn the phone in at the front office, they put it in the lockbox, and it stays, each classroom has their own box. And I wouldn't have known that if I didn't go to school. So I really want our principals to share some of these ideas with other principals who are struggling, because when I saw the boxes, I even asked the principal, do you get a lot of pushback? Because we do get pushback from parents that were taking the phone. And she said, no, we've been doing this for 2 years, and they're supportive, and they tell their kids, if you bring your phone, that's what's going to happen. And then they have it so organized that if there's an emergency, they give the box to they know who has each phone, so they can go deliver the phone.
I would be on board with that.
Yeah,
I'll just go on the record.
I absolutely agree.
I think, and, some parents push back against it, but I think for the most part, parents are anything you could do to help us, because they're also on their phone till 2 o'clock in the morning, and we can't get them off the phone. So, I think we have an overall policy. It's really in how we encourage the enforcement and partner with parents too, to make sure that kids know during the school day that they have to put their phones away.
Okay. And then you mentioned this notebook, things that you would want to change if you were in the leadership role. Now you're there. Can you share with us what is something that you're really wanting to tackle as superintendent?
I think that the biggest thing I want to tackle, well, two big things I want to tackle are really like the narrative that we can't do better, or the excuses that we have as like, oh, we tried that, or this doesn't work. I'm a very like bold person who's like, no, we're going to try it. We're going to do it. And so that's kind of my notebook, is like to break down any of those barriers that are causing us to say why we can't do something. And, you know, like we use the like 50th as like our like self-fulfilling prophecy, like, oh, we're New Mexico, we're 50th. And I'm like, no, we shouldn't be. Like, we don't have to move to first overnight, but what happens if we become 45th even, you know, like that's a huge success. And I think that we use it to kind of like as an excuse sometimes. And so I just want to encourage us to like talk about it in front of, because I talk about this a lot. Our children hear what we're saying, and they don't want to go to a school where they hear like, oh, we're 50th, or this is bad, and my teachers, like that fulfills like the outcome of who they think they're going to be. And so I just want to really like break down barriers and increase the positivity of what the kids see, so that they see what they can do as well.
So the narrative, what was the second one?
The excuses.
Oh,
yeah.
Excuses.
So they're
Sorry.
kind of
Yes.
connected. Yeah.
Kind of
just
connected.
excuses on why we can't do something. Or like, you know, oh, it's Albuquerque, we can't do this, or we can't. And I'm like, we actually can. Like, I'm going to show you, or I'm going to hold your hand along the way, and we're going to do this. So it's really like the excuses of why we can't do something. And if I'm in control of like resources that can help us do it, like I'm all willing to do that. So I just want to make sure that those are kind of the main things that we focus on.
A quick question. This has come up throughout the years. APS is a large school district, 141 schools, 70,000 students. A lot of cities our size they've broken up into several different districts. Just up the road in Colorado Springs, you know, it's smaller than Albuquerque, and they've got several school districts. Do you think that we should consider a smaller scale and operating on a smaller scale?
I don't think that there is much benefit to it. You know, we work a lot with the Council of Great City Schools, which is a consortium of the largest districts in the country. And we see a lot of success in large districts, and we see success in small districts. And we see a lot of things not successful in large districts and things not successful in small districts. You know, as a state, we have, 88 school districts that are small. And we don't see like a huge, like, oh, that really works, because I don't think that that's as connected to where we can see promising practices. And together, I think that like our resources and the way that, the tax base works for some of our schools, that we've been able to do like great things in capital funds to be able to build new schools. I think that that would hinder the ability to do that if Albuquerque, because of the way that we're situated, were to be laid out. And for example, like the police, we're able to respond to so much because we are able to have a large police department that can respond to schools across the city. If you have more people, then you could respond to a larger area. So it's some of those like central resources that I think really help the district, because we're bigger. We can leverage a lot more resource. But how can we adapt to have like the decisions being made closer to the school level? Mm-hmm. Because I feel like you can have the best of both worlds to be able to utilize the capital like infrastructure of a large school district, but narrow down the decision making to the school and community level so that they have more ownership and feel that like small sense as far as having ownership to the decisions of their school.
Dr. Blakey, we've asked you a lot of questions. Thanks for letting us ask you all so many questions, but is there anything else, final message that you want people to understand, or just, want people to hear from you as their new superintendent?
My big thing that I ask is, for parents to be involved with their kids, get to, support kids to get them to school, but mostly that our community talks positively about our children. That's something that's like always, when people say, well, what keeps you up at night? It's what kids think about themselves and their own outcomes. And so I just really want to encourage people to think about how we talk about ourselves and about our kids when they're listening. And that's, kind of my ask to the listeners, is that they encourage kids and that they speak positively around them, so that the self-fulfilling prophecy that our kids see is that they can do it and that they are successful.
Dr. Blakey, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks again to Dr. Gabriella Blakey for joining us in this conversation. I think it hopefully gives parents and just people in New Mexico more of a perspective of her thinking going into this new role. And yeah, she let us grill her a little bit.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was a great conversation, and things I think that parents really are wanting to know about her, and she really opened up today.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you, our listeners and viewers, now that we're on YouTube. Hello, YouTube. Feel free, if you got an idea or somebody you'd like to hear from on our podcast, always reach out. I'm gabrielle.burkhart@krqe.com via email, and gburknm on social media. And Jess, go ahead and give them a shout out if you want to, because Chris will be out for a few weeks.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and letting me fill in on this podcast. This is such a joy, and I really enjoy it. So,
all right. Well, thank you for listening.